she freezes. Then she drops her water jug, smashes on the ground, and she then took off on a dead run back to the village. The disciples on their way out, and as she went by them, their jalabiyas blow back in the wind, and she runs into the city and begins to yell to the top of her voice, I found the Messiah. He's told me everything that I ever did my whole life. In the meantime, the disciples get out to the well, and they say, Lord, would you like a little bit of Thousand Island on your Reuben sandwich? And he said, boys, I've got something to eat you know not of. And he said, don't say there yet 4 months and then comes the harvest. Lift up your eyes, look on the field, they're white, all ready to harvest. And as they look back to the city, the entire village, hundreds of Samaritans in their white jalabiyas. They didn't wear a tallit over them. They just had their white jalabiyas blowing in the wind, and the entire village was coming out, and it was like a field of white coming out to them. And when they got there, the head of the Samaritans said, we didn't believe because of what the woman says. We've heard your words, and now we know you are the Messiah. See, the first time that Yeshua makes himself known to anyone that he is the Messiah, it's to the Gentiles. And then it says that he spends 2 days with those Gentiles. Twice it says he spent 2 days. Why 2 days? A day is with the Lord 1,000 years. 1,000 years is as a day. It is a prophetic shadow picture of the time of the Gentiles, where the Messiah makes himself known to the Gentiles, but blindness in part has happened to Israel. But there's going to come a time that that blindness in part is removed. But right now, the eyes of the Gentiles have been opened up. Yeshua spends 2 days with them, and then after 2 days, he then continues on, and he goes up north, and then he goes right back to Cana of Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And when he had got there, then there was a nobleman from Capharnaum who then went to Cana when they heard that Yeshua was there, and went to see him and said, my son is sick unto death, please come pray for him. Yeshua said, go your way, he's already healed. The man didn't leave immediately. He's not going to travel at night. He leaves early in the morning. He gets halfway there, and his servant comes from Capernaum and says that your son has been healed. He said, what time did he begin to mend? It was the exact moment that Yeshua said, your son is healed. Now, this is John chapter 4, the last verse of John chapter 4. It says, this is the second miracle that Yeshua did when he came out of Judea. What is the first miracle that he did? No, telling the woman everything that she ever did in her whole life. That was the first miracle that he did when he came out of Judea. Remember, at Jerusalem, Nicodemus says, nobody can do the miracles you do except God is with you. He was doing miracles in Judea. But when he came out of Judea, he did 2 miracles. One, telling the woman everything she ever did in her whole life, which opened the doors for the Gentiles to believe, the Samaritans. The next thing was healing the nobleman's son from afar. Now, John chapter 5, verse 1, and Yeshua then goes up to Jerusalem. There was a feast of the Jews. Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. What is the feast that's coming up? Shavuot. Remember, from Nicodemus, the counting of the Omer, we count 7 Sabbaths. The day after 7 Sabbaths, we are to be back at Jerusalem for the feast of Shavuot, the feast of weeks in the spring, Pentecost. John chapter 5, verse 1, it's the feast of Shavuot. It doesn't say that, it just says it's the feast of the Jews. But when we go up, we see exactly what happens, because the first thing that happens is that Yeshua heals someone on the Sabbath day. And the following day is the high Sabbath of the feast of Shavuot. So this is what happened. Yeshua came into town. He got there, and before the Sabbath, and on the Sabbath, there was a man who was lame. For 35 years, he laid in a bed. And Yeshua said, do you want to be healed? And finally, after getting a straight answer from the man, he said, okay, then pick up your bed and walk. And so the man picked up his bed, and he walked. Yes, this is as fancy as it gets, ladies and gentlemen. It was not a Craftmatic three-way adjustable with a vibration attachment. It's just a bamboo mat, and that's all it is. He said, pick up your bamboo mat, stick it under your arm, and walk. You're healed. The man picked up his bed, and he walked. And immediately the Pharisees came down on him like a ton of bricks. Why are you breaking the Sabbath? Wait just a minute. This man was doing nothing any different than any one of them could have been doing that day, and probably were. But because he couldn't walk the day before, he couldn't do what was required by their rabbinic tradition. See, any Pharisee could have picked up that same bed, put it under his arm, and walked that day. Why? Because on Friday, they could have taken a basket from their house, anything from their house. They could have then walked a Sabbath day's journey from their house. And a Sabbath day's journey is a rabbinic invention anyway. Okay, there's no such thing in the scripture, but it does state it just because, it became a common way for people to understand a particular distance. But all they had to do was go then just a Sabbath day's journey and put down one of their household possessions. And then from there, they could continue on another Sabbath day's journey and put down another one of their household possessions. Now, when the Sabbath comes, when the sun goes down, everything from their house to that second possession of theirs in the doorway of someplace is their house. They can carry anything they need to. But why couldn't this lame man do it? Because he couldn't walk the day before, so he couldn't go through all this rabbinic mishigas. Yeshua said, their rules and regulations have no authority. Yeshua never breaks the Sabbath and never teaches anyone to break the Sabbath. But what does he do? He breaks rabbinic tradition. He breaks rules and regulations that men have made up in order to manipulate, intimidate, and control other people. And it doesn't matter what the rules are. If you think that I have the right to make a flaming hoop and tell you to jump through it, and that your righteousness is dependent upon you jumping through my flaming hoops, if you think I have the authority, guess what? I will have you jumping through flaming hoops your whole life, because I'm in charge. So Yeshua says, you have no authority. Take up your bed and walk. The scriptures say nothing about putting this under your arm. Now, it's a little bit different in Israel now. See, as I look out my living room window, there is a gravel road in front of my house, and right beyond that, there are some metal poles and a thin wire that is strung between these metal poles. It's called the Eruv. And this thin wire goes all the way up over a mile past Perea Hospital, and then around behind Perea Hospital, across the road, then around Nevi Oved, down to Alamot Junction, and all the way around, miles and miles of this. Now, on Friday, a rabbi will ride around in a pickup truck with another person, and they'll inspect and make sure that wire is there. Because now, on the Sabbath, everything inside that wire is your house. You can carry anything you need to. But if a person 50 yards on the other side of that line wants to come over to my house and bring a Bible over to fellowship on the Sabbath, guess what? They're breaking the Sabbath because they are outside the metal line, the Eruv. It changes from generation to generation, but the rules and the regulations of man-made religion continue to define and confine those who will adhere to the rules of men. So, it is on this next day that Yeshua is teaching in the synagogue, and they confront him about the healing of this man. And what happens at this point is he speaks of John the Baptist in the past tense. John was a burning and shining light, and you were willing to rejoice in his light for a season. Now, John is not dead. John has simply been put in prison. And the Gospels tell us that when Yeshua finds out that John has been put in prison, Yeshua immediately leaves Jerusalem and he goes up into the Galilee and begins to teach in the synagogues. Until this time, Yeshua has not taught in a synagogue up to this point. But this is the point at which this takes place. And we can go through all of the details of what transpires this summer, but I'm going to just take you right at this point, and we're going to leave Jerusalem with Yeshua. We are going to go up then into the Nazareth synagogue, and this is where the Gospel of Luke begins. See, Luke has given us the background of John the Baptist and his birth. He has told us about Yeshua's baptism and his temptation. But now we get the day by day, moment by moment of what happens in Yeshua's life, because this is where the Gospel of Luke begins, and it tells us the story of when Yeshua goes into the synagogue, opens up the scroll of Yeshayahu, of Isaiah, and he reads the scroll of Isaiah, stopping in the middle of a sentence. He rolls up the scroll, hands it to the rabbi, sits down, and says, "This day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears." Every eye was on him. Why did he stop in the middle of a sentence? Because he said, "And to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." And he closed the scroll. Why did he not read the rest of the sentence? Because the rest of the sentence reads, "And the day of vengeance of our God." He did not come to fulfill the day of vengeance of our God. He did not come to rule the earth with a rod of iron. He did not come to set up his throne as King of Kings and rule over the earth. He came as a suffering sacrifice to pay the atonement, to pay our death penalty, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord, and he closed the scroll. One half of the Torah and one half of the prophets, one half of the feast of the Lord, speak of the Messiah coming as a suffering servant. The other half of the Torah, the other half of the prophets, the other half, the fall feast of the Lord, speak of the Messiah coming as the conquering, reigning king. Have all the Torah and the prophets been fulfilled? My goodness, not in your wildest imagination. And yet, not one jot, one tittle has been taken from the Torah. So, this is where it happens. They invite him to oneg, which is the meal after the Sabbath, but today they're serving rocks. Take Yeshua outside the city, they want to kill him, and he walks right through the midst, and no one can touch him. It says that now Yeshua then moves from Nazareth, and he goes down and dwells in Capernaum. So now when he gets down there, however, we see that he doesn't stay in Capernaum. He goes down and he lives in a house in Capernaum. Several times it talks about the house that he lives in Capernaum. Several times. Now you ask, where in the world did this house come from all of a sudden? You know, there's not a lot said about it, but just think about it for a minute. Where could this house come from? Did he not, just a week before Shavuot, just a few weeks before, heal a very wealthy man's son who was dying in Capernaum? And you can imagine, if you were a wealthy person, if one of your children were sick unto death, and Yeshua healed them just like that, and you had an extra apartment, a bungalow down by the beach, you'd say, "Mi casa, su casa." You know, anytime you need a place to stay, as long as you need it, the place is yours. I've got a nice place picked out for you. Come and stay there, rent-free. Would not you do that? Sure, surely you would. Now, we can't prove that that's what happened, but it certainly makes sense, does it not? I mean, just in real life. Where else would this house come from? And so we see that he goes down and he moves down to Capernaum, and then the next time we see Yeshua, he then goes out and he's teaching around the Galilee, and he comes back on Friday morning. As he comes along the beach, he sees Peter and Andrew, James and John, and they're out in their boats, and they've been fishing all night.